Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and we'll be asking, why has the police and the London authorities allowed an Al-Quds march to take place on the weekend that marked the 6-month anniversary of the Hamas terrorist attacks that took place on October the 7th, the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, and we haven't seen the massacre of Jewish people like this since the Holocaust 80 years ago. We'll also be discussing a latest survey being carried out by the Henry Jackson Society looking at Muslim attitudes towards Britain and the conflict in the Middle East, and asking, what does this say about British society today? So in this programme today, I'm joined by Maureen Martin from the Christian People's Alliance. Good to see you, Maureen. Together with my Jewish friend, Sharon Klaff from Campaign for Truth. So welcome to the programme. And I'll start off with you, Maureen. It's always a pleasure to have you on Politics Today, and you bring so much to the programme, and I'm very grateful that you are a guest and a regular contributor to the programme. But can you share with us your thoughts on the correlation between the rise of Jew hatred that we've seen since October the 7th and also this same time, this upsurge of Islamic extremism that's threatening our very democracy and our very liberties?
Thank you, Sam. Great to be back, by the way. Thank you for that great introduction. Right, yeah, so when we see an increase in the Muslim population, we are seeing to see an increase in anti-Semitism and Jewish hatred. So what's happening in this nation is that the activities or the acts of October 7th have given this voice an opportunity to get louder and louder. I believe this is an exposure of what has already been there for a long time, aided and abetted by our mainstream media, particularly the BBC, who are very biased. For a long time, I don't think it even happened yet, they refused to call Hamas a terrorist organisation. The mainstream media has been feeding those who watch them, not me, but feeding those who watch them this anti-Semitic Jewish hatred for a long time. Now, the increase in the Muslim population, Islam is inherently anti-Semitic, we know that, okay? The Quran encourages their believers to, kill Jews and proselytize the way Muhammad did, conversion by force. So this event on October 7th, these atrocities, has given this very loud anti-Semitic voice an opportunity to now again play the victim. Because whatever they do, apparently they're the victim. They attack Israel, but apparently they're the victim. So we see now here again, we have this rhetoric that's being loudly and championed by Palestinians and their supporters, that Israel is again the bad guy. And we now have to work against Israel committing genocide against the Palestinians, when in fact it's quite the opposite. So it's a very concerning situation, Simon, and quite frankly, we need to watch it carefully and in fact probably do something about it as Christians.
Absolutely, and Sharon, it's always a pleasure to have you on the programme, representing the Jewish community. And it's great to have you on this programme today, because what we're touching on has a direct impact on the Jewish community. So what are your thoughts on, as we've marked this weekend, the 6-month anniversary of the horrific October the 7th terrorist attacks, and also what we've seen in this country, which is a 500% rise in recorded incidences of anti-Semitism as recorded by the Security Communities Trust?
Okay, so thank you for having me, Simon, and for meeting Maureen. Maureen is absolutely correct. It didn't start on the 7th of October. What's been going on in London and the growth of anti-Semitism has been gradually increasing for a very, very long time. I first noticed it way back in the sort of late 1980s, when it suddenly dawned on me that I was no longer able to protect my children. being a Jewish person living here in the United Kingdom. And as you know, I came from South Africa, where I know about apartheid, where I know about racism. And I'd come here to a free society. It was a relief for me to arrive here and feel the freedom that this country offered me. And slowly going forward to 1980s, 1990s, that began to be eroded. But we now in 2024, following this dreadful happening in Israel, this terrible catastrophe that took place in Israel. And I would like to remove Jews and Christians and any label that you give human beings from the whole scenario, and ask any human being who cannot object to what happened to the Jews, who can in any way condone the fact that there was rape and decapitation and castration and what I call paralytic murder and putting babies in ovens. That is barbarism, and any human being, regardless of their affiliation, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Christian, if they can't stand up against that, then I have to ask, what is humanity? What is the humanitarian crisis the anti-Semites keep talking about, if it's not about killing off human beings in that catastrophic way? So here in the UK, this growth of anti-Semitism has been happening. I feel that our country is divided, that we have the metropolitan areas where we have a huge influx of immigrants who take a certain political stance which is anti-Semitic. I have a little bit of hope that somewhere in that red wall are very nice British citizens who take the opposite view, but they're the silent majority. And I'm hoping that the next general election is going to show that, and that we'll be able to find somebody to vote for who might not be an anti-Semite. Don't know where from, not from Labour, not from the Conservatives, and not from any of the others. So I'm hoping somebody will arrive.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. And Maureen, you know, it's extraordinary, isn't it? The past weekend marked the 6-month anniversary since the worst mass terrorist attack in Israel's history. And Sharon there described the most horrific acts of barbarism, genocide, war crimes committed by Hamas, and the world seems to have forgotten what happened. But how can the police and the London authorities allow Al-Quds Day, which is Arabic for Jerusalem, rally to take place on the Friday, knowing that this was the anniversary of this attack, but it just encourages hatred and extremism and more Jew hatred on the streets? Don't our police, don't our government understand that the more you allow these hate-filled marches to take place, the more that this generates hatred not only against our Jewish community, but also against the very institutions of democracy and freedom that have been built in this nation, that's made this nation a great nation and a beacon of light and a force of good in the world?
Absolutely, Simon. The only answer I can give to that is the police are intimidated. Clearly, look what happened with Big Ben. We had from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, projected onto Big Ben, and nothing happened. Nothing at all. Big Ben is a symbol of this nation's history, a symbol of its nation's power, the base of power, Westminster Palace, and absolutely nothing happened. They're completely intimidated. And in fact, this year the march was called the National Demonstration for Palestine, even more inflammatory. And this march has been allowed to go on for years. No one has opposed it. No mayor has ever said, wait a second, maybe we should not allow this march, because they're advocating for the extermination of an entire group of people. It's much different from any other march. We have a March for Life. We are, a March for Life is advocating for the preservation of life in the womb. That's completely different. Al-Quds is demonstrating, advocating for the extermination of a whole group of people off the planet. This should not be allowed. It's the purest form of hate speech, the purest form. It should not be allowed at all. The Iranian-owned and Iranian-backed. So we know who's behind Al-Quds. It's the newspaper. It's completely funded by Iran. So we know who's behind it, and we know their intention. It should not be allowed. It's inflaming an already sensitive situation, making Jewish people feel even more unsafe in the capital and in other places of the UK. Because the first point of attack is obviously the capital, it's London. London is the hub, it's the base of this movement. And so it's not helping our Jewish neighbours feel any safer. And until the authorities do something about it, they'll continue.
No, absolutely. And Sharon, can you explain a little bit more about what Al-Quds actually is? Because in previous years, we've actually seen demonstrations of demonstrators actually waving the flag of Hezbollah, which is the Islamist terrorist organisation based in southern Lebanon, with its main goal is to destroy the nation of Israel, which is part of the arm of the Iranian regime. But share with us what Al-Quds Day is and why it's so troubling to allow these marches to take place and to bring the hatred on the streets of London towards Israel, which then effectively has a huge impact on your community.
Okay, so Al-Quds is Jerusalem Day. This is the day that Iran created for Iranian supporters or Islamic supporters to go on the streets and demonstrate for Jerusalem to be returned to the Muslims, to the Islamic faith, because they say that Jerusalem is holy only to Muslims. It's their place. They claim it to be their third holiest site in the world, and they claim that they should be governing, ruling and controlling Jerusalem. So that's what Al-Quds is. And increasingly over the years, this has become a very big affair that's been assisted by the police. It's not so much that the police are shying away from their responsibility, but they are actually assisted by the police. How do I know this? Because I've been on many of these marches counter-protesting them. And what you see there is a group of police with the police chief actually standing in front of the march and leading them through London, almost conducting them like a circus master. And on a few occasions, they've certainly tried to arrest me, trying to take me off the streets, trying to get me out the way when there are hordes and hordes of these people there calling for death to Zionists, death to Jews, having Hezbollah there. We've even had a particular case where one of the leaders of the Al-Quds march, I think in 2017, 2018, who was actually arrested for inciting hatred against Jews. And we had a police case going, and we got right down to identity parades and everything. And then somebody in our community decided to bring a private prosecution, which has a lesser proof of evidence, taken over by the CPS and thrown out. So we don't only have a police force that assists them, but somewhere we have a legal authority that doesn't take action when Jews are attacked on the streets, either physically or simply for being Jews. And this year, it was not only distasteful, we're facing not only an attack on Jews through what happened on the 7th of October, but our country in Britain is being attacked by another Iranian proxy called the Houthis. They've actually been shooting and sending missiles onto British boats. And so one would think that there'd be a bit of sensitivity to say in this country, sorry, this year we're not allowing this march. We're not going to assist you, but we're going to ban it. It's not going to happen.
That takes leadership, and doesn't look like we've got much of that.
We don't have it.
And Maureen, just share with us how these pro-Palestinian rallies that are taking place every Saturday to protest against the war in Gaza, but effectively it's a kind of pretext to mobilise Islamic public opinion in this country, using the Palestinian cause as an opportunity to Islamise and effectively target our key democratic institutions.
Exactly. I mean, as Sharon says, there's a lack of effective policing. There's no mayoral intervention. The mayor should intervene, but unfortunately the mayor does happen to be Muslim too, so that does actually knock that out of the ballpark for any possible actions from the mayor to stop these marches. Indeed, this is a power play by the Islamic organisations, such as the Muslim Brotherhood and, Al-Quds, the Iranian-backed newspaper. It's the power play, and there are no consequences for their actions. And this is the problem. They've been allowed to, demonstrate with impunity, say what they want to say, act the way they want to act, and no consequences. This is emboldening this side so that they think, well, if we can shout louder, we can demonstrate longer, intimidate more, more intimidation, then we will gain even more ground and get even more power. And it's working, unfortunately. This is not just a kinetic war that's going on. Not just a kinetic war, it's a PR war. It's a propaganda war. And unfortunately, the other side are really good at the propaganda. They're exceptionally good at it. They've been doing it for decades. And unfortunately, Israel are losing the propaganda war. They are capitalizing on the fact that Israel are focused on ridding themselves of this enemy called Hamas. Israel are not focused on the propaganda war, and I can understand they're not, because they're focused, they have a mission, have an assignment, okay? But unfortunately, the Palestinians are focused on the propaganda war, and they're very good at it, okay? And they are shouting loud, intimidating, threatening our power structures, intimidating MPs, doing all of this, and no consequences for their actions. And this is, again, a lack of effective leadership, not just in London, but also in the Palace of Westminster. There's no effective leader to stand up and say, this is not right. We need to do something about it.
Well, we did have Suella Braverman, and then she was sacked, so she was standing up against it.
Exactly.
But Israel would be able to do much better in terms of public relations if Israel had a level playing field when it came to media coverage, and the fact that she doesn't makes it almost impossible for Israel to have good PR and to get her message across, despite having her own TV station, which is I-24, that does a good job, and despite the fact that Israel gives access to information and intelligence on military operations. And sadly, the West doesn't see the fact that Israel is on the front line in fighting this Islamic extremism, and if Israel doesn't destroy Hamas, then that same ideology will also destroy us as well. Sharon, as a Jewish woman and a proud supporter of Israel, is London now a no-go zone for you, considering the hate marches that we see every Saturday taking place in central London?
I would say yes. You know that I've been on many marches. I've organised many counter demonstrations. I've been beaten up a few times. So I'm quite a veteran at these marches. Free Palestine's not a new slogan. It's been going around for years. What has developed, Maureen mentioned the beaming of the Free Palestine from the river to the sea on Big Ben. At Easter time, London was adorned with Ramadan lights. I didn't see any Easter lights. And this I found shattering, absolutely shattering. I live in a Christian country. I didn't see the great Archbishop Welby coming along and saying, I'll fund some Easter lights. If people have funded Ramadan lights, I'll put up some nice Easter lights. Let's get some Easter eggs. Let's do something for the kids down Regent Street, for instance. We'll have a hunt, an egg hunt. So this is not only for people succeeding in their propaganda. There's something about our society that's not getting involved in this issue in a way that can combat it. And I'm not sure what we can do to get them to do it. I mean, if we go back, I think it's now nearly 11 years since a soldier called Lee Rigby had his head chopped off in the middle of London. and nobody commemorates him. We have a friend who's a street photographer. He was the only person on the 10th anniversary of this man's murder who went along, and he filmed himself being there. There wasn't another single person there who remembered that Lee Rigby, who had devoted his life to protecting this country, became a soldier, and they chopped his head off. And then we fast forward. You remember I came here and spoke to you about, I think it was in 2021, when they drove through Golders Green, threatening the rape of daughters and the murder of mothers. Well, what happened on 7/10? We didn't stop it here. We allowed them to get away with it. And now we go and we fast forward to Israel, and they're allowing it to happen in Israel. They're talking about what happened in Israel from October the 8th, not from October the 7th. And if you mention October the 7th, they say, oh, well, 75 years of abuse, what do you expect us to have done? So we're at a stage now where London increasingly is becoming unsafe. They're not only in the central of London, they're not only at the House of Commons or outside the Israeli embassy, which is where they used to be, but they're now in Marylebone. They were caught running down Marylebone High Street near the BBC, and they were found in North London. They're travelling around North London, intimidating Jewish homes, Jewish centres, Jewish schools. And I'm afraid what the government is doing is saying, we will give you more money for you Jews to protect yourselves. But that's not the issue. We don't want to have money to protect ourselves. We want to live in a free society. And we expect our government to create that free society.
Absolutely. And Sharon, why is there this failure to actually identify that with the rise of Jew hatred, we're seeing the upsurge of Islamic extremism, and these are just the difference, this is the other side of the coin, and effectively they're one and the same. So when we get Jew hatred, we have an upsurge of Islamic extremism. When our Jewish community is attacked, our democracy and freedom is attacked. And by defending our Jewish community, we are defending our nation and our liberty. How hard is it for our government, our civil service, our police force to understand this basic lesson of history?
It's not hard at all. I just think it's a question of ignorance at some points. And also, as I said before, the intimidation factor. We know what happens when Islam decides that they don't like what you say. They kill you. Look what happened to Charlie Hebdo in France. That was over a cartoon and people died. So we know that the intimidation factor is a really big factor in how Islam behaves in particular nations. And it's all part of the terrorist MO, basically. That's why terrorism kind of, I won't say it works, but that's their aim. They perpetrate violence to persuade you, or force you, if you like, to do what they want. So with all these forces converging now in this nation, you've got the political arm, you've got people funding the Palestinians, Iran, all these other actors all coming together, and they have an agenda. But our side of things, like even Christians, for instance, are not really on the side of Israel the way they should be. There's a lot of erroneous teachings in the church about replacement theology, and it's really affecting the way that Christians should be supporting our Jewish neighbours. It's part of the Judeo-Christian ethic and values. Without Judaism, there'll be no Christianity. So even that has been kind of perverted, and we're not getting the reaction from those who should be supporting the Jews that we should.
Yeah. And Maureen, also just want to make our viewers aware, if they weren't aware, that there was a survey conducted by the Henry Jackson Society. It was published in the Sunday Telegraph on the weekend, where they surveyed attitudes and opinions of British Muslims. And they said that just 1 in 4 British Muslims believe that Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October the 7th. They also asked whether Hamas committed murder and rape in Israel on October the 7th, and 7.24% of British Muslims said that they had, compared to 62% of the general public, and a further 39% of British Muslims said that Hamas did not commit atrocities, and 37% said they did not know whether they had or not. What does this tell us?
It tells us, I wonder what happened to the 38%. That's what will happen. I'm wondering, what happened to the 38%? 62% of the British public said that they did. What happened to the 38%? What do they think? That's troubling in itself, quite frankly. Listen, you might as well put the 39% in the Muslims that said they didn't commit atrocities, and 37% is, if you don't know, you might as well put them together and say 76% of Muslims believe that Hamas did not commit rape and murder. This tells us there's a glorification of violence against Jews in and amongst Muslims. They glorify it. It's all part of their teachings.
So they deny it, and yet Hamas actually show the body cams filming their atrocities for the world to see.
Exactly.
But to the Western audience, they say, no, we didn't do it. And Sharon, what do you make of this survey that also says that 40% of British Muslims said that they sympathise with Hamas? What kind of message does that send to the Jewish community, and also to free-loving people in this country, that 40% of British Muslims who are prepared to go on record to say they actually sympathise or they are sympathetic towards a genocidal terrorist organisation that is Hamas?
Okay, so in 2013, a very well-known British journalist called Mehdi Hassan, wrote an article and he published it in the Huffington Post. It's still available, you can look it up. And in that he had a dirty little secret, and his dirty little secret was that the majority of Muslims in this country hate Jews, or not anti-Semites. This came from Mehdi Hassan, who we know is not exactly the best supporter of Israel or of Jews. And this is what he wrote, and he hasn't retracted it. So I'm not surprised that this Henry Jackson survey has come up with these sorts of figures. I think one of the big problems is that Western people tend to see the world through their own eyes. And so they're looking at barbarians who can commit these atrocities, thinking that they are people who are civilized, that they've grown up with the same kind of morality and ethics that we have in the West. And they can't actually believe it happened. So they therefore blank it out because they can't believe that anybody would have done something like that. So they blank it out. And because of, there's a kind of dual thing here. There's the Islamic anti-Semitism, but sadly there's also the normal Western anti-Semitism that we know about. And they kind of are feeding their own anti-Semitism by blanking out what these Hamas, Palestinian, jihad, whatever you want to call them, they're all on board on this. Whatever they did, they're blanking it out so that they can feed this anti-Semitism through and not feel evil about it. That they can justify why they feel they've turned the tables. It's called projection. They've turned the tables. They've tried to produce this narrative that's actually the Jews that murdered and decapitated the babies. They use this narrative. They've used it, I call it an intifada. I think I've told you before about the brick intifada, where they started building houses to get rid of Israel. They also had this narrative where they said that the Jews were committing rape. That's also kind of intifada, this barbarian intifada. And now they've got the food aid intifada. So going back to what Maureen said about the propaganda, BDS is behind this. BDS has built itself into a brand. It no longer needs words. You just see the colors and you know exactly what to think. You see the colors and you know the slogan. You know the Jew hate. You know exactly where to be, where to hold your flag, and what to chant. If we in the West don't combat that kind of propaganda, and after all, we have the best public relations companies in the world. You know, we have, what are they, Ogilvy and Mathan, all these companies. Where are they? Why aren't they actually acting against this?
Sharon and Maureen, thank you so much for being my guest on this week's edition of Politics Day. You've both done a great job. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. There is a direct correlation between the rise of Jew hatred and the upsurge of Islamic extremism. If our government doesn't protect the Jewish community in this country, then our democracy becomes threatened, our way of life becomes threatened. And that's why it's imperative that as Christians, we stand up for our Jewish community and defend them as we can. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.